Thank you for joining us for today's Criterion Learning Series on year-end processing for Canada. I did want to mention a couple of things before we get into processing anything in the system or showing anything in the system. So first off, I want to put this disclaimer out here. If you have any questions regarding the taxability of incomes or deductions, set up tax questions in general, of course, please consult an accountant, a tax advisor, or a tax consultant. Criterion Support and myself, we're not tax advisors. We can't provide tax advice like that. What we can do is, if you have the advisor say you need to do this with this income, or you need to do that with a particular deduction, something like that, what we could do is we could help you configure that, but we cannot give advice on how things work. So, how certain income or deduction or whatever should be taxed or whatever. So that being said, I did want to point out a couple of the deduction limits that will be changing in 2024. Now, I found this information online. I want you to double check this. Again, do your research on here, check it with the government, check it with an accountant, with an advisor, that kind of thing. But these are the things that might affect you as an employer in Canada. You may have these various deductions configured in the system, so you should be aware of the deduction limits for 2024. So RPP, the money purchase registered pension plans, the limit is now $32,490. And these are the contribution limits. There are wage limits as well that you should be aware of. I didn't have enough space to put on the slide, so I didn't put it on there. But again, that's something you can find out online if you have anybody who might be highly compensated. The registered retirement savings plan, or RRSP, has a $31,560 limit for 2024. And deferred profit sharing plans, DPSPs, have a limit of $16,245. And again, this is information that I researched and I found online. It's certainly possible that something may change before next year. So please consult with whoever you need to, a tax advisor, the government. Maybe some law comes in the last minute here. Obviously, we still got a month and a half till the end of the year. Things might change. So please be aware of those things. But those are things that you'll be able to change in the system and be able to set those things up out there. Let me show you where we would do these things. So I'm going to switch over here to my browser. So you'll be able to see what's going on here. You should see my self-service. What we're talking about today, none of it's really in self-service. So about the only thing is being able to view your tax forms as an employee in self-service. Everything else is configuration that's going to be happening in the back end. So where does that happen here? So I'm going to go over to payroll, HR, doesn't matter where we are, because we're going to go to configuration first. And so we're going to go to our settings. All right, so there's a number of things that you'll need to configure for next year. As an example, I'm right here on payroll schedule. It doesn't really matter which order you do these things. You just need to do them, right? So as an example, you will need to make sure you have a payroll schedule for next year. You can't process a payroll without a payroll schedule for the year you're trying to process. So if you do have only one, yours might just have one entry here. You might have 3 or 4 like I have here. You'll need to update those schedules that you're going to pay for next year. I did want to remind everybody also, we do have a chat and a Q&A. So if you do have questions, maybe about how you set this up, those types of things, again, not tax questions, but those types of things, please feel free to put those in the Q&A or in the chat. And we'll try to answer those as best we can. If we can't answer it during the meeting today, what we'll do is we'll try to reach out to you either directly by calling you or emailing you, or if you want to just email us, of course, we can reach out to you. Of course, you may have a partner you're working with and reach out to them too. So we can all try to help you out as much as possible. But here's payroll schedules. So just so you're aware where they are under payroll administration, payroll schedules. If you're ever curious about finding something and you can't find it, you can always just type in a few letters of what you're looking for and the system will match it up. So if you don't remember, it's called payroll schedules. Maybe you just type in schedule or something like that. You can find it like that. So once I click here, I see my active ones. Of course, I might have some inactive ones out there that I'm no longer using. Maybe you need to reactivate them for next year. Who knows? But that's how you can toggle those. But let's go into one of them just so you can see what this looks like. I'm going to do a monthly. What I'm going to do here is the same process as if I was doing a bi-weekly, a weekly, a monthly, semi-monthly, whatever frequency. I'm going to do this. So you'll see I have my schedule for this year for 2023. This is a monthly one, and I've got each month in here. And I might have previous years as well. So you might be able to go back and see, oh, what were you doing in 2020 or something like that. So you can see those out there. Now, a few things before I generate I may want to check that we're still going to be paying the certain number of days after the period end date. Maybe you've made a change and you never updated this, and you don't want to have to go through and update every single one of these when we generate. So fix this here, make the correction. Maybe it's 5 days, maybe it's 7 days, something like that. You can always fix that here before you generate for the next year. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and create one for 2024 by hitting new. And you'll notice it does say 24 here because I already have a 23 in there. It's letting me know this is the start date of the first period. All right, so this might, in your situation, depending on how you're doing it, it might actually be a date in 2023 because the pay period starts in December. But that's okay. It's not, doesn't mean it's not going to generate them for next year. It just means that's when the start date is. In mine, it's monthly, and it's January 1st every year. So that obviously it's going to be in the same year, but it's certainly possible you're going to be starting sometime in December and so forth. Now, here's the number of periods I need to generate. I'm doing monthly, so I'm doing 12. Obviously, if you're doing like 7 monthly, you're going to do 24, maybe 26 or 52. It's the number of periods for this schedule. And then I simply hit generate. All right, and you'll see it generated a new schedule out here for this year using this number of days after. Now, it's possible that the date that it generates might be on a weekend, it might be on a holiday. In my situation, because it's monthly and it's 6 days after, it's certainly possible that this payday might end up on a Saturday or a Sunday or a holiday. So I might need to change that date. Now, this one on the 26th, or sorry, on February 6th is a Tuesday. I don't believe that's a holiday or anything like that, so I'm okay with that. But I might go to a different month and find that it did wind up on a weekend like here, and I need to change it because, you know, maybe you're not going to be paying on a Saturday, you're going to pay on Friday. So you can just click and change that, or maybe you already have a calendar right in front of you. You don't need to click. You can just type in the date that's correct for each one of these. Now, you don't have to fix it here, but the problem is if you don't do that, when you go to process payroll, it's going to use this date. And if you forget then, all of a sudden, all your checks, all your payments are going to be dated on a Saturday. And, you know, that obviously could cause some problems. So you want to make sure that you have it right. Now, again, you could change it when you're running payroll. That's fine. So you could always do that out there. Now, a quick tip in here that I like to point out to people, sometimes you need to process a payment that is older for whatever reason. Maybe there's an adjustment you need to put in, you need to backdate it to, let's just say August. So a little quick tip out here, I did it right here. I needed to backdate something to February. If I use a pay date that's in the future, today, tomorrow, anytime in the, well, not too far in the future, but as long as it's in the future, even though this pay period is long past, I could now use this pay period. It'll show up when I go to pay processing, or let me go to payroll. When I go to pay processing, this pay period will show up as well as like the other ones that normally would show up out there. So let me show you as an example. If I go out here and I do that employer and I choose monthly, even though that pay period is long ago, it is now showing up. So just a tip out there that might be useful for you. Yes, you can use off cycle for stuff and go back a few pay periods, but you can't always go back as far as you want. Now, monthly is a little tricky because you got, like, you know, you're obviously going back way far, but, you know, weekly and bi-weekly, you can only go back a certain number of pay periods. If you need to go back to July, you're not going to see that on an off cycle in November. So just a tip on that one. If you ever need to process something a little bit later, just change the pay date. And then, of course, when you go to process, you can just update the pay date and say, no, I really wanted to date it 2/15 or something like that. Or let's say February 3/15. All right, come on. 3/15. There we go. Let me just use the calendar. I don't know why it's not letting me type there the way I want, but 3/15. And now it's still okay to process, because once I've started a payroll, it's going to stay in here until I either delete it or I finish it off. So now I could say this is a 3/15 adjustment or something like that, and move along with my payroll. Okay, so just be aware of that. Now, as I mentioned, make the changes in here, save anything that I've done. If I don't save, even though I just generated this one, it won't save it. So you want to make sure you save that, and do that for all the payroll schedules that you need to update. All right, so that's payroll schedules where you might need to change those things. Another thing might be your holidays. So you'll have to go out here, you'll have to generate holidays for the next year. All right, so I've got holidays out here for 2023. You can see all these out here for, now I usually don't update these dates, so don't worry if these are wrong. Just states. All right. So what you would do, and again, these might be US, I'm not sure, but it doesn't really matter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to check the box next to the one or the multiple that I want to create for the next year. So you'll see here, I'm just going to do this. Now you might have one for, let's say, people normally working on a weekend and their holidays skewed, or maybe you've got a different holiday schedule for different groups of employees or different provinces or something. So you may have possibly different holiday schedules in here for multiple for 1 year. But check the box next to one or more. You'll notice once I check the box, this clone button shows up here. And then I can do it right here. Now, of course, if I'm copying to another company, I could do that too. I'm not going to, but I could change the employer. Here you'll see the date. Now it says 2023, but I'm going to change it to 24. And I'm going to call this 24, and I call this 24. I'm not going to change the income code, but you could choose to change the default income code. And then it's going to create one for 2024. When I go in here, you'll notice all the dates are incrementing. Yeah, these are US ones because I don't believe you celebrate Martin Luther King Day and these other dates. It doesn't really matter. What you would want to do is go and update these dates, because what it did is it simply copied the month and day and changed the year. So obviously, as the calendar moves along and dates move forward, you just need to come in here and update the dates to the correct date for that situation, for that particular holiday. And of course, if you have a new holiday for next year that you want to add in here, you can add, and you could always delete. I don't need Martin Luther King for an example. You could delete it if you need to. But make sure you do that if you're doing holidays in your timesheets, you want the holidays to generate for your set holidays. Okay, benefits. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of a benefit plan, but you may want to make changes in your benefits that are effective next year. All right. Don't worry about the kinds of plans. Again, I've got a mixture of data in here, but let's just say I've got a disability plan and I need to update the rates for next year. I'm not going to change anything in the settings. That's not the scope of this training. What I'm going to do, though, is go to the rates right here, the last option on here. And you'll notice, of course, I've got this data. Now, mine's obviously several years old, but I can generate new rates for next year. So if it changes on January 1st, if you've got a benefit plan where you've got rates changing on January 1st, this is the best place to do it. You don't have to individually update a bunch of employees. You can go out here, hit new rates, put in 1124. When I hit create, it says, do I want to copy? You don't have to, but the point is to make it easy for you. So when I do that, it copied all the rates, including the older rate. Now, this is where I could go through and say, all right, for the 15 or 24, now it's not 41 cents, maybe it's 43 cents or something like that, and go through and update all the different rates. I'm not going to bother doing that, but you can see how easy this is now to update each one rather than create a whole new one or obviously update individual employees. All right, so that's one thing you'll want to do there. Now, what will happen is once this effective date comes around and you calculate benefits after this, whether you do it manually on an individual employee or whether you do it for a whole benefit plan or you have a task scheduler running, as soon as it runs on or after this date up here, it's going to start using these new rates. All right, so that's how that will work out there. And when I'm talking about calculating, as an example, I can check this box and hit recalculate and put in 1124, and it's going to use those new rates on anybody enrolled in this plan on 1124. I could go to an employee, I don't know one off the top of my head, who has this, and I can recalculate theirs manually for 1124 anytime in the future, and it will calculate that. And you also may have a task scheduler down here. I don't believe I have one, but you might have one out here where you've got a system task out here that, well, not a system task, but a task out here that calculates benefits. And if that runs after the 1st of January, it would calculate, or on or equal to the 1st of January, and in the future, it'll calculate using those new rates. So that's how that will work out there for your benefits. You may do an open enrollment to carry one plan over into the next year. Some companies do that when maybe they do a retirement plan and other plans where they carry over from one plan year to the next. That would be an open enrollment. That's not within the scope of that, but you may have an open enrollment with an auto rollover that will roll people over from one plan year to the next. So you'd want to make sure you have that out there with an effective date of January 1st or whatever the situation is, and do that rollover. I'm not going to cover that. I don't have time to cover that today. All right, let's look at updating things like incomes and deductions. So when I go to deductions here, I got a variety of deductions. Obviously, some of these you wouldn't have. They're for the US or whatever, but let's look at, this RPP plan. So you'll want to review these things to make sure that they're correct. So the code and the description, of course, doesn't matter as far as like printing the forms. You could have this called 001 if you want it for the code or something like that. You probably want the description to make sense to your employees. So you put down like RPP deduction or whatever it is. Make sure the deduction type is correct. All right. In this situation, it is RPP, but we have RRSP, et cetera. So just make sure this is correct. Now, if it was not correct during the year, that may affect your taxes going back to all the payrolls you've calculated. So just be aware that if this was set up as maybe post-tax and it should not have been, and now you come in and correct this, you may need to go back, run reports looking at were people taxed correctly or things like that. So if you find that situation, reach out to support, let them know what you found, but we can help you to correct anything that needs to be corrected, show you how that would be done. All right, things like here, the system labels. So you should find system labels in there for the different T4 boxes where you want something to show up. So here you see T4 box 20 is the system label I have out here for these. That means it's going to show up there for those, the amounts, the employee and employer amount in these boxes. All right, there should be in your system a whole bunch of these. I believe we mass added to all of them. It didn't get mass added to my POC here, my test environment. So I don't see them all, but there are ones for lots of other boxes out here. So if you need a certain deduction to show up in a box and it's not in this here, make sure it's here, and then it will show up in your T4 in that box. Now, this is not something you needed to have set up, let's say on January 1st of last year or of this year. As long as it is here when you go to generate your T4s, it'll be correct. If you generate your T4s and you go, whoa, I'm missing all of my RPP, it's not showing correctly, just come in here, make sure the system label is there, and then you can regenerate your T4s and it should fix that and show them correctly. All right, so make sure that's right there. Of course, you may want to just review things. Who knows, maybe your match has changed or something like that. So come down here and check out these. Now, just be aware, if I change it today and I put in a different match, it's still the middle of November. So I still got some payrolls going on that will use the I would say the incorrect match, right? Because if I change this to 4%, suddenly the match is 4% going forward for the rest of my payrolls. I don't want that. So make sure you change the match at the appropriate time. You could tie to a new benefit for next year, have a new deduction code for 24, and put in the match here, and then in your open enrollment rollover, roll them from one to the other. Then you don't have to do anything. It'll automatically update everybody with the correct match because they're going to get added to a new deduction. It'll expire the old one. So that might be one way to do it. Again, reach out to support if you need some help setting something like that up. Here you'll see the limits. So these are like on a slideshow, 32,490. Obviously, this is a little bit older, but you would put that number in here. Again, don't put it in for right now because this is still in effect for this year. So you don't want to suddenly have people contributing a couple $1,000s more than they should be able to. Put it in after your last payroll of the year, or like I said, with that new benefit plan or new deduction plan for next year. Of course, update other deductions and review your other deductions and stuff like that. Again, make sure that's got those right system labels for your T4 boxes and so forth. So it looks like I don't know if RRSP set up here, but same idea. Okay, same thing can happen with income codes is possible. You've got income codes that should show in certain boxes on the T4 that normally incomes don't show into. But let's say you've got some status employees, you want to make sure it shows up in the right box. Make sure those codes are set up to show that way. So you can go into one. I'm just going to pick one here. It doesn't really matter for my testing purposes or my demo purposes here. And you'll see these labels here. Okay. Now, of course, check the compensation type to make sure it's right. Hopefully it's been right all year long. This is, again, one of those things where if it is not right, let's say it's not set as cash and it's set up as something else, or it should have been set up as something else and it's set up as cash, you may need to make some changes on the employee's record. So it's always a good idea to review these, on a regular basis. I think annually is not bad, but definitely if you're noticing something that is not right in your mind, you're, payroll person, you probably get a spidey sense of when things aren't right. So always take a look at these things. If you have questions, you can always hit this help and it will kind of explain what these are and how that all works. All right. But here's those labels that might affect where it shows on the T4. Again, if I needed this to show up in box 71 or box 14 or something, I can add that label there. and it will show up in that box. Again, if you generate your T4 and it should be in 71 and it's not there, you can always come in, add that label, regenerate, and it should be there. If you do have any incomes with limits, again, just like deductions, make sure you change them at the appropriate time. Don't want to change the limit before the end of the year because all of a sudden a deduction or income might start that should have ended. So make sure you change that correctly. Okay, a couple other things. Workers' compensation. So these are rates and limits that you may need to change for next year. So when you come in here, you should see your current rates. They may have an effective date like mine. They say January 1st of 23. And you can go into this and look at this information. So I can see the rate per 100, a modifier, employee contribution, and a limit. So those are different limits that might apply. I obviously don't know what your rates might be, but you can go in there and put in those new rates. Now, you want to review the ones for 23 and add a new one for next year. Don't just change this because, again, you might impact a current one. And it's always a good idea to have historical information out there. So if I added a new one and I called it education and I put down 1/1/24, I could then go through and put in the new limits for next year. The older ones will go all the way through 12/31. And then as soon as I start doing stuff in 24, it's going to take the new limits out there. All right. The other thing is it may be you need to tie it to a certain province that people are in. I'm not sure why it says Steve. Interesting. But tie it to the right province. So in mine, let's say I'm just in one province. I don't need to do that. If I'm all in Ontario and that's all I'm doing, nobody's working in multiple provinces, I don't need to fill this in because it's going to be the same for everybody who's in this workers' comp code. But maybe I've got some people in British Columbia and other people in Saskatchewan and Alberta, who knows, they're spread around. I can set up different ones for different provinces and say, okay, here's the education rate for British Columbia and put the rates in there. And then I add another one and say, okay, here's the education rate for, I got all the US states in here also, Manitoba. I don't know why I said twice, but I got Manitoba, and then put in the rates for that. So you would add new ones for each province where you need to put that in there. All right, so make sure you put all those in there so that it can properly calculate this. Now, there should be a deduction that's tied to that will work in concert with these rates to make sure it withholds correctly or the employer amount is calculated. So make sure there is a deduction for that to handle that. So that's how you could update workers' compensation. Of course, if you have a new workers' compensation, that's going to be in your code tables. So something new out here, I can come down to workers' compensation, and where are they? There it is, workers' compensation, and I could add the new one. So let's say, I don't know, I'm just going to make one up, maintenance, and I'll use the same one here. Now, if you wanted to identify them maybe by the province, you might say like maintenance BC, and then use that down here, and then make a second one for like maintenance Ontario or whatever it is. So you can put those out there. All right, so now that I've got that, now I can go back to my workers' compensation, and I can add the new one in here for maintenance BC, and then tie it to British Columbia and put in the effective date and the rates. Okay, so that's a lot of the setup. Obviously, that's a big part of it, is making sure the system is ready for next year. I don't think I've missed anything. Tax rates. If you do have any tax rates that you can control the rate. Now, this is a US tax, don't worry about it. But let's say I had, not sure why it's not showing my taxes here. Oh, I think that should show. Oh, it's interesting. It's not showing it. Let me put in tax name. So you'll see various taxes out here. If I search for Canada, I should see different ones. Anyways, I would have the right, I don't know why it's showing all these different things. Let me just put Canada instead of just can. And I should see, okay. Now this one, obviously you don't have a rate for your employer because it's just the federal. But if there is a tax where there's an employer amount, employer rate, you'll want to make sure that you have that in there with the right effective date for next year. So you have a certain tax where there's an employer rate, you'll want to make sure you have that in there. Let me just show you as an example. Now, one thing you may see when you come in here, because we added the capability of tax forms, you might see something like Canada FWT. There's not going to be a rate because it's used in the rate table, but you might see it tied to a form. So you might see the TD1 here. So the if it's at not, my system doesn't have it, but you might see that over here. So if you come in here and you see that, it's okay. It's not like going to calculate zero rate or something. It's just tied for the form. But if there is one where there's an employer rate, you'll want to make sure that rate is correct for the right effective date. All right, now let's get to actually doing your reports out there. So we're going to go to our reports. Oops, let me go to payroll reports. And there's certain reports you're going to run to make sure things are right. Now, I'm not going to run all the reports because we certainly don't have enough time in the last 5 minutes to run everything. But you'll see various reports that you can run to make sure that things are right for the year. Now, you probably are doing these every payroll, maybe every month, every quarter, to make sure things are right. And you might be filing taxes based off of these things already, but it's never a bad idea to run them for like the full year. So you can run things like your deduction totals and say, I want to run it, for the employer. I've got 2, but I'll choose the employer there. And I want to run it for now. I'm running it now for 23, but certainly you might be doing this in January. So you'd want to say previous year. Obviously, that's going to show 22 in my situation, but I'll say current year. And I'm going to run it for everybody. I'm not going to put it down a certain cost center or payroll schedule or anything like that. And just run that. Just to show you an example of one of these reports. Now, there's probably 9 reports I would say are good to look at. But here you can see the various deductions. Now, again, ignore the US deductions, but you'll see your different deductions up here. Now, these are totals, obviously. So I can see, my RPP, I had 10,000, probably have more than mine, but as an example, I got 10,000 there. For the employer, here's the employee deduction, just so you can see a good idea of your different calculations that are out there. You can now also run this by employee if you want to make sure that, say, when you look at the T4s, it matches up. Now, it should, because it's all reading from the same information, but one thing I always do when I'm balancing out whatever is I run reports just to make sure that there's nothing that's really off, because sometimes things can get off for whatever reason. Maybe, sometimes we have errors. We have humans writing reports and something happens. So it's always a good idea to look at these things, make sure they're good out here, and all the reports equal exactly what you want them to equal. So here you'll see this is going to be the deduction total by employee. Now, what this is doing is each deduction and then all the employees that have that deduction. So if I go down to my RPP as an example, here are all the employees. Here's their gross income, obviously not very highly paid there. Here's my hours worked, my employee amount, year to date, employee amount. I don't have any arrears, luckily, employer amount, and year to date. Now, these 2 numbers, when you're running it year to date, should match because it is year to date. If you ran this, let's say for November, the employee amount might only be a few $100s, but the year-to-date amount might be totally different. So just be aware, those 2 numbers may not match based off of the criteria you're using here. All right, so you can see how that works. And this is stuff you would look at your T4s and go by and say, okay, Ted, his T4 indicates he had $750. Okay, good. That's what it says on this report. So you can just look at this. Now, you might have a total of this and you look at the, a total on your T4s and go, oh yeah, we got a total amount on all these things of 11,640, or I'm sorry, 34,775, and that's what it says. So we don't need to go to individual employees, but never a bad idea to double check, maybe spot check individual employees to make sure that they're right. All right, so that's deduction by total by employee. This one is the other way around. This is by employee and then deductions. So I would see like Ted and his 5 deductions or whatever he's got. Okay, I'm not going to run that one, but that's what this does. We have very similar reports down here with incomes. The only difference is their incomes versus deductions, but they're the same thing. This will be your total incomes. This will be the incomes by income code and then employees underneath it. So again, this will be a useful one. You might want to double check this information, just like you're doing like with the T4. While that's running. Come on, report finish. All right, so you can see there's the income code and the situation bonus, and here's everybody who got a bonus. Well, some people didn't, they got 0, but I can see what's out there for everybody. Here's somebody who got 1. All right, so I can see how that's working for each person by income code. So as I go down to the bottom, now I got double time and then so forth. Now, you might say, well, that's great and everything. Maybe I just hide the people who did get 0. That way you don't see everybody. You just check that box right there. See everybody who doesn't get paid will be removed. All right, and then there's tax reports, of course. So you got your taxable wages total, which is going to be by tax code, just totals, no employee detail. So you run this one, you're probably very familiar with this one. And this is going to have US and Canadian taxes because I use this demo for both. So you can see that, obviously you'll see like pension plan, et cetera, are right here. And then we got the taxable wage by tax and taxable wage by employee. So these are very similar to the income ones, except for these are taxes. So you'll see out here, again, I'm gonna do current year, and this will have that by tax code and then by employee. And of course, this information is gonna be on the T4. So you're gonna see, okay, for Canada FWT, here's their, their subject wages, there's their, how much they withheld. And I can see those numbers by employee. So I can look at all those numbers there, and you can see here's my EI. Go down and show my CPP. There it is. So I can see all that information right there. All right, if I need that detail, I want to make sure that's right. There's my employer CPP. All right, so that's another example of those reports. I'll ignore Connecticut and so forth. So those are various reports you want to run. Now, of course, you might find that there's adjustments to be made. That could be done in different ways. I showed you how you could change a payroll schedule and the date. So if you want to run something, maybe there's like a bonus you didn't record correctly or something, you want to run that through the system, you can run a payroll. Make sure you change that date in the schedule so you can run it. The other thing is you might go in and see that you need to do a import. Now, this is one where I certainly recommend you reach out to support on this one, just so you understand what you do here, but you can import in payroll data out here for a certain time frame. So I could go out here and say, all right, for my monthly one in this period in May with this date, and it's an adjustment for so-and-so, and I want to do this. You could download the template. This will include all the employees, and then you'll be able to put down, okay, I needed to adjust their, I don't know, RRSP. It was wrong for some reason. Maybe it was missing, and whatever the situation is, you could do that as an adjustment, or it needs to adjust the taxable wages or the tax amount or something. So that can all be done through here. Reach out to support. If you've never done this before, especially reach out to support so we can help you with that, make sure that you do it correctly. I know I'm putting a lot on Connor and Patrick and our team over there, but they're the experts on doing adjustments if you ever need to do those. So the last thing, of course, is your tax filing. So I'll go to the T4. Now, mine's probably going to be empty out here, or maybe just have one or two payrolls. So now this is something, I don't have mine set up with this in here, but your business number should be here. You'll have to choose that. Of course, the year, this should show 2023 in here. We updated it relatively recently to have the current year in there. All right, taxes withheld, or paid, I should say right there. And then, of course, you can run it for like one employee or something like that to be able to do this. Now, I don't have a CRA business number, so I can't generate it. And I don't want to set that up in the system. But you would hit apply. Now, there's a good PDF it, so I can look at it on the screen. But if you want to drop it to Excel or XML, if you're an XML type person, that's great for you. But if you want to drop it out to Excel because maybe you want to look at it in there instead, you could do that. This is, if I do run this, it's not like this is the final version of the T4. This is just the current version. If I needed to make an adjustment, like I said, run a payroll, do an import, change a code on a deduction, like make sure it's in the right box, I can make all those types of adjustments and then rerun it to get the right version. All right, so that would give me the correct one. It's not going to let me do this because I don't have this out here. All right, and then you'll be able to publish them. So once it generates this and you're happy with everything, you reviewed all your things, this publish allows you to send it out to self-service and or email it to your employees. So of course you can print it, save it as a PDF on your own, but you may want to push it out to the employees to see in self-service as well as to an email. So that's what publish is out here for. In order to publish, you do need to have a document location configured, and you need to have document delivery configured. So you need to have a folder created for your T4s to land in, which is done under the document management. And then you need to come in here and tell it how you want to publish. You'll see send by email, post in ESS. The path is the folder that you created. So I got various folders out here. You could call it anything you like. It doesn't even be called T4. You call it taxes or something like that. But it's a folder you would create over here in your documents. And then I'm not sure why I have the report there. The T4 should be here. Thought it was. It might be that because these are all the US stuff, it might be because my employer is set in the US, so I don't see the Canadian ones. But yep, you do that T4 right there, and then you can publish out. So obviously went a little bit over, and I appreciate anybody who stuck around. I see we have quite a few people here. I don't know if there was a lot of questions. I see some comments from Connor out there about CPP is adding a higher wage cap with a different withholding rate. So he let me know about this. There's a link. Let me click on this link here to see about this. I wasn't aware of this one here. I guess there's a new wage cap. Connor, I don't know if you want to speak on it real quick. Or Patrick. Connor's here.
Yeah, sorry. I can comment on that one quickly. It's just it's basically a higher end cap where there's a newer wage rate above the normal cap for CPP. So
Oh,
it's a second stage cap that'll be applied.
Okay.
So
oh yeah, I see it out there. Okay. All right. So, but our system already is handling that, right? So it's part of our tax update. So it should have that already in there for that.
correct. Yep.
Yep. All right. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. I did want to point out one other thing. So this is our first year end for Canada. We're going to be doing US. Now, probably nobody here is going to do in the US and Canada, but maybe there's partners or whatever that do both. Of course, if you just want to see what happens in the US, you're certainly welcome to join us in a couple of weeks to talk about the US. Otherwise, next month, we're going to revisit Canada. So if you would like to see that again, we're going to cover the same stuff. We're not going to cover anything new unless like maybe something changes between now and then. I highly doubt it, but we're going to cover that again, and then we're going to go to the US again. So these are our next 3 webinars. We're focused on year end and taxes and so forth. So that's what we're covering in January. We have one more US one, not taxes, but a tax related thing beginning of January. And then middle of January, we get kind of back to our regular scheduled programming of HR and payroll and talent and so forth. So hopefully you were able to get a lot out of this today. And if you'd like to join us in a few weeks to look at this again, please feel free to join us. If you do have questions, as I've mentioned a number of times, please reach out to us. You'll see our number and email address right there at the bottom. Of course, you may have a partner you're working with. You can reach out to them too. If you happen to see a problem with the report, as I mentioned, something is just not working the way you're expecting, don't pull all your hair out. Reach out to us first. It's certainly possible that there's always changes to tax forms and stuff like that. So we want to make sure that we catch those things right away and help you to resolve any issues with a minimal level of stress. So thank you again for joining us. Hope everybody has a great rest of the day, and I will talk to you all again in a few weeks.